It's not even just the tech that you own in your data centers or in your cloud environment. It's all of the star as a service, right? So platform as a service, software as a service, security as a service. There's that dividing line where the provider is responsible for some of it, but you're responsible for everything below the line. And that gets away from a lot of people, which again, I think that's why we're seeing some of those posture management, SaaS posture management, tools come hit the market. And frankly, the ones I've seen are terrific. It's really kind of exciting to see that level of visibility and control, coming out finally.
Welcome to the Head of the Breach podcast, where we talk everything offensive security. I'm your host, Casey Camilleri, and today we have Joshua Brown. Josh is a seasoned CISO with extensive experience in designing and building robust information security programs that deliver efficient and effective risk management. His expertise spans zero trust design, data centrics, risk mitigation, security awareness, and aligning security strategies with business goals. Josh has a wealth of experience, and today we're going to have a great conversation all about that. So hopefully you walk away with some great wisdom that you can apply if you're aspiring to be a CISO, or if you're an individual contributor looking to just gain more insight into what leadership means in the cybersecurity space. Josh, thanks for joining. Could you just run through what a typical day for a CISO looks like?
Yeah, I kind of wish there was a typical day. In my most recent experience, it's a whole lot of meetings. And I say that as somebody who deeply detests meetings, but at that level, they're generally pretty important meetings. So I spent a whole lot of time every day with my peers, the other VPs and heads of IT in different functions. And that's really considered, the primary team for a CISO. Now, my security team, on the other hand, I was meeting with all of my leaders of that team, and at least on a weekly basis, and then down level monthly generally. The one-to-ones with my team members were the non-negotiables in my schedule. Those I always kept regardless. Maybe you have to move them around, right? Because of schedules, the CEO wants to talk to you or something like that. But yeah, a whole lot of meetings. I tried to set aside about an hour each day to read news, catch up on things that are happening, and stay current. But it's some days are easier than others. When you're not running an incident, it's a lot more fun. But it's a lot of face time and a lot of influence.
What do you think the number one skill that you need to have in order to do your job?
Well, I think, if you look at, I know a lot of CISOs. Some are technical, some aren't. And what that tells me is being technical is not an absolutely critical skill to have, but you have to be, I would say, the soft skills. And I kind of hate to call them that because I think they're some of the hardest skills to develop and to master. But you have to be able to meet people where they are, speak their language, understand, psychologically understand the things that are important to them. If we try to drag everybody into our realm and we're talking tech and we're speaking about security and risk, we're going to lose 90% of the audience.
Yeah. How many times have you been like in a boardroom or just even a leadership meeting and someone starts to talk technical and you're like,
everybody just kind of zones out. Yeah.
Yep. You can read the room, but like they don't.
And I came up through tech on the engineering side, so I have to be really careful. Like I'm probably more technical than the average CISO, I would say. Not bragging, that's just the history of how I came into the into the seat. And it's fine to talk tech with your other IT people, but the people that you have to spend the most time influencing are the other executives, the CFO, the COO, the chief marketing officer, head legal, right? And so again, you've got to develop those relationships and nurture those relationships to really understand what those people want and need. What they don't want to hear is how many SOC cases you've worked or, how many phishing emails you blocked. Like that's just, it's just noise.
You find that most of the conversations are directed around the financials and the risk management of security?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny is I going into my first CISO gig, I assumed that what the board would want to talk about is risk, but the board doesn't really want to talk about risk, at least not in that term. What they want to talk about is impact to the business, which really means dollars. So, if you use kind of the FAIR model, like you're translating everything into business impact, that is a universal language at that level.
For listeners that may not know, like what is the FAIR model?
Well, the FAIR model is a model of risk measurement that basically converts everything into business impact or dollars. So your common currency is money. And, there's still stuff. That's a lot of hand waving, right? But there's a whole lot of stuff that happens behind the curtain. In any of the models you choose, you're still talking about risk. You're just using a different unit of measurement. So the same kind of considerations apply. What's the likelihood? What is the gravity of the impact? What kind of data is being? But ultimately, you all roll that up and you say like, hey, if we make choice A instead of choice B, there's a chance of a negative impact of $1.6 million in the fiscal if the worst happens. They understand that.
Do you ever get concerned that what you might be presenting is wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a
yeah, it's a concept. I mean, look, I think everybody's doing the best they can, right? And we're using the information we have available to us, which isn't perfect either. And so we draw conclusions based on our experience. And I think the cyber industry, we're maturing, but we're not a very old industry compared to IT, right? I mean, security came out of IT. So we're not only having to keep up with all of the technical challenges and threat vectors, but we're having to adapt to learn how the business works and what the business needs, and become a supporting and a driving business function. And that's why I think a lot of CISOs get frustrated that they don't have a seat at the table historically, right? But we're seeing that change. But yeah, when you put together a board presentation or you're speaking to the CEO or you're trying to influence a peer, yeah, there's always the concern, like it's sort of like being a weatherman. Like I can't predict the future. You could spend an inordinate amount of the revenue of a company on your security program. That's not going to guarantee you better results. It's not going to guarantee. It's kind of like homeowners insurance, right? Like we're helping you mitigate risk, not remove it. If you have homeowners insurance and your house never burns down, it doesn't mean you wasted money. You were there to mitigate the impact of that potentially catastrophic event. So and the flip side of that is you have to project some confidence. I'm not talking about cockiness or arrogance, but like if you're the cybersecurity expert, the top seat for the company, you have to be realistic and I think tell people what likelihood looks like. But it's sort of like forecasting the weather, right? Like here are the things that we think are coming together and they're going to likely produce this outcome. Could be worse, could be better, could not happen at all. It's just kind of the way it is. So speaking in probability probably helps.
Now, what about some proactive approaches? We like to talk a lot about the offensive security side on this podcast. What are some of the things that you found to be most helpful in building programs at your organizations that proactively identify vulnerabilities and risk?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think as any program moves through its kind of maturity, whatever maturity model you use, right? You go from ad hoc security and firefighting to, okay, we've got steady state, we've got processes, we're executing on those, to getting into the proactive. And that's pretty late in the maturity cycle, but it's absolutely critical. And I think there's a few things that are really important. So first is observability or visibility you have across the enterprise. If you can't see something, you can't detect that there's a problem. Getting deep into the business and understanding where the business is trying to go, how the application stacks work, what markets you're moving into. Risk is indexed to market verticals, for example, right? In my last role at H&R Block, it was a weird niche market because it's tax, right? Well, there aren't a whole lot of tax companies. They're not a bank. They're not an insurance company. They're a financial institution, sort of, but not really. And so like the threat intel that you could buy commercially and 10,000 retail locations. So you got retail exposure too. But it's not the same as like having a store full of product that can get stolen, right? Although there's personal information, right? That was the product. Right. But, so we decided to get out in front of this stuff. We tried multiple threat intel sources and none of them really brought the kind of value we would expect. So we built our own threat intel team. And that was a pretty new feature of the team, a new function that we added in probably the last 18 months or 22 months I was there. And the idea is that, they're out there trolling, looking for threats. So we would find things on the dark web that indicated pending attacks. Some of the stuff we got through the financial services ISAC, threat intel sharing that way. But, you have to prepare for what's coming, not what's happened. And so, again, it's back to your point about the confidence in the information, right? Is you're sort of reading the tea leaves. Like, where is this going? Where are the attack trends heading? If we start using more AI, what's that going to expose us to? Okay, let's make sure that we've got the appropriate stack in place so that we can be, appropriately protective and then react appropriately when the time comes.
Two things I want to dive into based on.
Sorry, that was a whole lot, but yeah.
No,
It's a complex question.
Yeah, and the answer is going to be definitely complex, and it's not going to be one size fits all, right? We all want that smoking gun of like, hey, this is what you should do, and if it was that easy,
Right.
this job probably wouldn't exist. But
Yeah.
two things you mentioned there is that really resonated with me is how do you identify all your assets, right? Like that's at large organizations that can be really hard because that's constantly changing. So I'd like to hear how you did that. And then follow up, we have a lot of CISOs that are like, I need some sort of threat intel data. What do I buy? What do I build? And it sounds like you kind of, you have some experience there I want to double click into. But first, what's worked in kind of getting an understanding of all your assets and where they're located?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a place where the technology has been around for a while, but I think the move to the cloud changed this somewhat. Having a CMDB, like content management database, right, where all your assets are indexed, as long as that's a manual process, it's never going to be accurate. And so, the way we approached it, and again, at Block, hugely dynamic environment, not so different from a large university. 60 to 70,000 tax pros were onboarded and offboarded every single year, right? And all of the endpoints and tech that went with that. So keeping track of all of that in real time is an immense challenge. Again, if you said it, if you don't know what your attack surface is, how are you going to defend it? You'd only be accidentally successful, which nobody wants to be accidentally successful. So there's some automated things now that do discovery. What we did is we didn't trust in any single piece of technology. We looked at, of course, our CMDB. We looked at our cloud index. We looked at, active known IPs, and we looked at our EDR, on the endpoints, and we monged all those things up and then grepped them for differences. So if the count of devices in Active Directory doesn't match the count of devices in CrowdStrike, okay, now we have a problem. Let's figure that out. Part of the concern around asset management and inventory management is making sure that your tech stack is present and configured properly and working on every single device that's out there, right? There are ways to improve the fidelity of that without necessarily having perfect knowledge of what's in your environment. You can and should build everything from gold images that have all of the configurations built in. You can and should have some sort of configuration management tool that will go out and rewrite to the gold standard if there's configuration drift. So there are things you can do, but it's really not where it needs to be, honestly, from a technical perspective. So you have to definitely not rely on a single tool, single platform, but bring in the signals from everything. That was a lot of talk. I forget what the second question was now.
Well, I just generated more questions for you every time. Because, we're working on attempting to solve that problem too, the attack surface management problem, how it's highly dynamic. Right now I could see about 1,000 plus changes this morning across different organizations that are going to have some sort of security concern or risk, right? No matter if it's low, high, critical, or whatever it may be. But there's something that you said that I just want to make sure all of our listeners take away, which is that the cloud, the dynamic infrastructure, it's huge. And you're talking about gap analysis, right? Where's the gap? Where's the drifts? You're talking about you got to have consistency, because if you're inconsistent and you have too many inconsistent configurations, builds, all that, your job becomes that much harder, right? But everything is so fluid now, and it can be fluid in so many different ways that's why we have attack surface management nowadays, right? Is because it's dynamic, and it's like highly, highly dynamic.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even just the tech that you own in your data centers or in your cloud environment. It's all of the STAR as a service, right? So platform as a service, software as a service, security as a service. There's that dividing line where the provider is responsible for some of it, but you're responsible for everything below the line. And that gets away from a lot of people, which, again, I think that's why we're seeing some of those posture management, SaaS posture management, tools come hit the market. And frankly, the ones I've seen are terrific. It's really kind of exciting to see that level of visibility and control, coming out finally.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the second thing I wanted to double click in on was that threat intel. I'm a CISO and I'm looking to get my hands on some threat intel because I believe that's what I need. Right? Like you can build, you can buy, you can do a mix. How should they be thinking about that? And what did you learn from your experience of building?
Yeah. So first off, if you're in an industry vertical that has an ISAC available, like financial services ISAC, I think there's tax ISAC, there's insurance ISAC, like join that. and contribute to it, right? So as you see threat signals, contribute them to the group. You're going to have lots of data coming in. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it isn't. But this is really super, the threat intel is probably the most specific thing to a business of any of the security controls that you need. You have to deeply understand where your business sits to understand what kind of threats are emerging against it. We had a lot of conversations internally before we decided to go, with our own threat intel gathering. And part of it, like I mentioned earlier, is that the niche that H&R Block was in is not something that's broadly covered by out of the box threat intelligence. But there's a flip side to that, which is a lot of this stuff, a lot of the bad stuff that's happening on the dark web and the deep web is happening in foreign language markets. So if you don't have people on your team that know Chinese, Russian, Ukrainian, Brazilian, Portuguese, the threat actors are going to be speaking those languages. The access brokers are going to be speaking those languages. So do you have the resources to get some deep cover agents in those dark web markets and gain trust and build a reputation? I mean, not unless you've got a massive team, right?
I was just going to say, most of our listeners are going to be shaking their head no.
Right. No, who does, okay, maybe like a Chase, right? A big bank, city, government entities for sure. But, at the end of the day, you have to look for, do what you can yourself and then fill the gaps with professional services for the things that you can't do or that don't make sense to do financially. We looked at multiple sources where these companies had people embedded in these dark markets. So they would actually tell you hey, we've seen some accounts on your domain that are for sale and we will buy those up for you. And then, so you can do things like that, but it's expensive for sure. And like anything else, it doesn't have a guarantee of success. So you have to weigh that against all your other competing priorities.
Yeah, and even then you're reactive, right?
You are. That's right.
You're not very proactive. You're not preventing.
Yeah.
You're just reacting and mitigating the situation.
I mean, listen, I'll share a story with you that I've seen. This happened in my career where we saw users being compromised on personal devices, and I'm not talking about BYOD. These are devices that we had no visibility to, no ownership of, no configuration management of, that had no access to touch any corporate resources. But the bad guys weren't after going right at the front gates of the corporate resources. They're hitting the carbon layer, which is, the hardest layer to patch. And they were, tricking people into providing their credentials on personal devices, which you would think, I've never entered my credentials on this device before. But people do, because it looks familiar to them. It looks like a Microsoft login page, for example. How do you solve that one, right? How do you exert control or protect something that you have no visibility to? It's a puzzler. And I think, for me, it was one of the kind of the Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns. That is not my asset. I don't have to worry about protecting that. I'm focused on the stuff that I can control. And what I've kind of come to realize is control is an illusion. We are not controlling anything. And we shouldn't think about it in terms of control. It's about influence. It's about being adaptive and protecting what you can, with the knowledge that your protections are going to be imperfect. Anybody can be hacked, and probably will be. So, I think sometimes the proactive versus reactive is kind of a damaging conversation, right? Because if we had perfect clarity and clairvoyance, we could see out ahead and be able to know, oh, this guy's going to attack, this threat actor is going to attack us on this date using these protocols on these ports. Cool, we're ready. That just isn't how it works, So you have to imagine what the scenarios look like and find the highest risk points and do your best to provide, proactive defenses against those types of attacks.
Now, when you're building your threat intel program, how many sources did you have? Was it was it a handful? Was it hundreds?
Well, like anything else, you start small, right? There's tons of great open source threat feeds, and it's far too much data for humans to be able to process on their own. So you have to create some automation. You have to create some some way of bringing those sources in, shedding the stuff that you either already know or that isn't relevant to you, and then focusing in on the stuff that's good. When you get the stuff that's good, that's when the real power gets unlocked, because you start enriching the data that your SOC analysts are seeing. You start enriching the data that your AppSec team is sharing with the developers, and that's when you really start bringing context to InfoSec in your particular sphere of influence. So you said the number of sources. I don't know what the number of sources were that we had, but you can definitely get drowned out by the noise if you're not careful. So you have to really be careful in curating your feeds.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to have for you, Josh, which is like, there's often a signal versus noise, right, when it comes to threat intel, and you want to manage that, but managing that means time and resources, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, it goes back to the old ages of like, we had intrusion detection systems, but they're only as good as like how you baseline and tune them, right?
That's right.
Otherwise, you get drowned out with noise, and threat intel is kind of the same way.
Well, and I think, the really big players, the platform players in the spaces, the CrowdStrikes, the Microsofts, I don't want to call specific people out, just as for an example, they can see the threat data across all of their customers, right? Everybody in Azure, everybody in AWS, and being able to leverage that information makes everybody better. I mean, we're all fighting the same bad guys to one degree or another, regardless of what sector we're in. So, I love some of these, like we talked about the SaaS posture management stuff a little bit. I love some of these players that are like, look, we're picking up weak signals of compromise that by themselves don't mean anything. It could just be like, oh, this account has a password change. Well, that could be totally normal. It could be abnormal. But if they see a connection between several events that by themselves are not threat signals, but together they are, they can share that across all of their customers and everybody benefits. And that's the real power, I think, that we're starting to see come into the market.
Yeah. And
I don't have to wait to get attacked to build a threat, pattern, right?
Right. And I'll give our listeners another example is we do social engineering and phishing in the past 5 years. That's where I've seen just great strides of success, is that, if you're on one of the major platforms, they see something with customer A, customer B, the algorithm, the machine learning is just going to basically shut that down and help protect all those customers. And that makes, from an offensive red team perspective, that makes that job really hard, because that domain that I put 40 hours into building, aging, and sending just gets burned like that.
Yeah. Well, and again, when you're talking about defensive layers, preparing for that kind of thing, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The number of attacks of the bad guys going right at the castle gates has gone way down. That's just noise now. Everybody's got great firewalls. Everybody's got layered defenses. They're going after people, because people are easier to exploit, especially like you and I are both Midwesterners. Like, we got the Midwestern nice thing going on. We like to help people. And so psychologically, that's what gets abused, right? And this is where AI gets really kind of scary, I think, for security practitioners, because the bad guys are using it much more effectively right now than the good guys are using it to defend, I think. Now, that'll change as the market kind of fills in, and matures. But the phishing campaigns are getting way more sophisticated. They're way faster. Exploits for published vulnerabilities or unpublished vulnerabilities are coming out way faster. That's shrinking the window needed to patch and to remediate. And there's always been an asymmetry of power between the attackers and the defenders. And that's going to continue, right? So we don't have unlimited time or unlimited resources to defend. And we have to be right 100% of the time.
It's the cat and mouse game.
And that's and this is why I drink, right?
Right. Now, what do you, to kind of build upon that a little bit, what do you think is the biggest struggle in the industry from your seat that you see? Like, what is the number one struggle that we're facing? What's the battle that we're losing?
I mean, I think we've been collectively getting our butts kicked for years. The number of breaches continues to go up, and there's breach fatigue, I think, in the general public, right? I remember when the Blue Cross Blue Shield breach happened, my kids were in low single digits, and I'm like, oh, great, their social security numbers are already out there. That's fantastic. Like, you can't.
Yeah, before they even know what a social security number is.
That's right.
Like, I have young kids too. It's like, they don't know, but it might be breached before they even do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. Like, and I'm not sure there's a single biggest thing. So some people would say, what's a talent shortage? At the same time, I know lots of people who have applied for hundreds of security jobs and don't even get an interview. So I'm not sure how much of that is real. I think there's a lot of contributing factors that put cybersecurity programs at a disadvantage compared to the attackers. And we're already, like I said, we're already kind of back on our heels. I don't think the industry has necessarily done us any favors in terms of how products are developed and marketed. Like Zero Trust is a great example, right? Zero Trust is not a product, but it became a marketing term. So if you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework guidance on how to implement a Zero Trust architecture, it is technology agnostic. It's hard work, right, to do that kind of thing, to provide that kind of an infrastructure. And for companies that weren't built that way from the ground up, it means re-architecting everything. Who's going to do that, right? Who's going to take on that kind of a disruptive, expensive task? But at the same time, like, well, the CIO read it on an in-flight magazine, and now he wants 100% more Zero Trust. And so the market, the cybersecurity market, fills that space by offering products that claim to deliver Zero Trust. Well, no. They may help you achieve Zero Trust. They may let you shortcut some of the really painful re-architectures. So I think too often we reach for technology to solve a problem when we haven't even covered the basics of good policies, good procedures, good standards. And hell, man, I'll take more people over more technology any day of the week. Having smart people who eat, live, and breathe this stuff, that are passionate about it and want to solve hard problems, like that is the key. And unfortunately, like people are expensive, in some ways even more expensive than cybersecurity tooling. And so that can be a really tough sell for CISOs that are trying to grow a program or build a program for, a company that doesn't have one.
Yeah. And last question I have for you, Josh, because I think it's a good segue, is like, how do you make your team passionate, and like, how do you help them, progress in their career?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there's 3 points there for me, broadly. So first, connect people up with the why of what they're doing. You want to make sure, your leaders all the way down through your individual contributors down to the most junior analyst understands why what they're doing is important and how it ladders up to what the business is trying to achieve, right? So instilling that sense of purpose. You're not just people don't want to be ticket takers. They want to be creators. And so seeing how they fit into the overall picture of what you're trying to achieve and what the business is trying to achieve is really important, and to keep people motivated and engaged. Second is, I think, instilling a sense of ownership in each member of the department. The way we structured things in the past at Block is I made sure that all of my managers, all my squad leaders, they owned their own budget. They owned their own roadmaps. They owned their OKRs. So, they're responsible for the outcomes. And a lot of those outcomes, again, on the topic of control, you can't control it directly. It's influence, right? So, we would meet quarterly, go over all that stuff to make sure people understood we're tracking where we are against those objectives and looking at those outcomes. So everybody becomes outcome-based. Everybody's pulling together. And more importantly, everybody's looking to the right and the left of them to see, like, what can I do to help out my buddies, whether they're cybersec people or not? Finally, I think is, as a leader, and mentoring is a key to this piece. I think you have to be comfortable in getting your people to grow, even if it means they're going to leave and go on to the next great adventure somewhere else. People are like, I would love it if you'd stay, but I'm so happy that you've grown out of your current role. I'm sorry we don't have something for you, to grow into. Being able to view your role as a leader, as a mentor, as a coach, as a teacher, and instilling that in your teams too, to mentor the junior members of the team, or even mentor people outside of cyber or IT altogether. That's how you grow as a team. And that mutual respect means, like, I will pay for your certification. I'm not worried that means you're going to go somewhere else. I'm investing in your future. And so treating people like adults, is incredibly important.
Spoken like a true leader. That's awesome to hear, Josh. That's great wisdom for our listeners. Unfortunately, that's all we have time to chat about today, but I really appreciate you coming on the show, Josh.
Hey, my pleasure, Casey. It's a great conversation.
If anyone wants to get in touch with you, connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
They can get to me through my consulting website, which is digitaldefenseconsulting.com. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I'm happy to connect. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for the chat, Josh.
My pleasure.